Welcome to Privatizing School Funds, Threats to Equity, Access, and Educational Quality. We will join our host, Betty Menchik, in progress.
And I am and I am fortunate to be joined. I am the chair of the local League of Women Voters Education Committee. Joining me today as co-presenters are Jacqueline Stewart, Joanne Winkleman, and Susan Chalgen. So please take this opportunity to mute your speakers. Whoops. Excuse me while I close something. Tonight is a prelude to the presentation by Dr. Josh Cohen, author of The Privateers, How Billionaires Created a Culture War and Sold Vouchers. His presentation will be Tuesday, May 20th at the MSU Federal Credit Union on Mount Hope Road at 11:30. You can see in the chat room a link to that register for that luncheon. If you have any questions tonight, please put them in the chat room and we will try to answer them after the presentation. We will also save your questions for Josh's talk on May 20th. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. Josh Cohen is a political science professor at MSU, nationally recognized as an authority on school choice. He has been quoted in numerous media outlets. It's impossible to read about vouchers without his name being mentioned. His book raises compelling issues about the origins of school vouchers and their effect on schools and students.
So I'm Jacqueline. What is this school choice that we're going to be talking about tonight? Well, when school choice originated in the 1990s, it applied only to public education. Parents could choose to send their children to neighboring districts or enroll their children in a charter school. Charter schools are public schools. So this might mean, for example, a student at Okemos could ask to be sent to Hazlitt, or one in East Lansing could go to Lansing or whatever. So that was it was within public school system. Since then, choice has morphed into a strategy for supporting private schools with public funds. Republicans in Congress have reintroduced multiple bills that would provide billions of dollars to fund private and religious K-12 schools. It's still the case in Michigan that choice means only moving between public schools. But because we can see legislation emerging that threatens that, and we know the future because we see it transpiring in other states, we want to share that with you. It can't be emphasized enough that the legislation emerging will provide billions of dollars to fund private, mostly religious schools. Next slide, Betty. So 2 examples of this kind of impending legislation. The Student Empowerment Act. That would increase the availability of 529 education savings plans to include K-12 elementary and secondary school tuition, as well as other K-12 educational expenses for public, private, and homeschool students. This was introduced by Senator Ted Cruz on January 20th, 2025. 529s, and many of us will be familiar with them, were intended originally to help parents save for tertiary education, for community college or for university. And the way we saved for that was by putting them in these accounts, and these accounts were tax exempt. Well, what this bill would do would expand that to K-12 schools, with a consequently larger sum of money being removed from tax revenues and funneled to private schools. The other piece of legislation that's impending is this Educational Choice for Children Act. That would establish a new tax credit for individuals and corporations who make charitable contributions to organizations that give scholarships or vouchers for students to attend private schools. Now, this was reintroduced in January 2025. It provides $10 billion in annual tax credits to be made available to taxpayers. That money is then funneled to private schools. Next slide. This is our agenda for this evening. We're going to talk about what is school choice as defined by current administration. What are the different kinds of school choice programs? What impact does private school choice have on public education? And what are the pros and cons of these choice programs? Lastly, we're going to look at Arizona as an example of what might be in our very own future. Next slide, Betty. So what are the different kinds of choice programs? Well, there are several ways that these choice programs transfer public funds to private schools. Some are straightforward and some less so. These programs are called education savings accounts, or tax credit savings accounts, or school vouchers, or tax credit scholarships, or refundable tax credits. There are others, but these are the main ones, and we're only going to focus this evening on the first 4 of these, using information from the 2025 ABCs of School Choice published by EdChoice. Now, we've deliberately chosen EdChoice as our source. I'm not going on to that quite for a moment. We've deliberately used EdChoice as our source for the information on these kinds of programs. EdChoice is an organization founded originally by Milton Friedman and his wife Rose, with the express intention of expanding these choice programs until they're universal. That means until anyone can apply for and get these monies. EdChoice is, in terms of the subject we're discussing this evening, very pro-choice. Next one. So the first and the largest program currently across the United States is this thing called an education savings account. Education savings accounts establish a publicly funded, government-authorized savings account with restricted but multiple uses for educational purposes. Parents can use the funds to pay for expenses including school tuition, tutoring, online education programs, therapies for students with special needs, textbooks, other instructional materials, and sometimes ESAs may even be used to save for college. Now, let's be clear about the mechanism before we go to the next slide. The mechanism here is that the government takes taxpayer money and puts this money into these educational savings accounts. Parents who have signed up for one of these educational savings accounts then can withdraw this money and pay for their child to go to private school. Now, the parameters vary from state to state. For example, there might be different eligibility requirements in different states, and there might be caps on how much the state will provide in these ESAs. The parents withdraw from these ESAs to cover any eligible expenses. Bottom line, in any ESA, there's a direct link between government dollars and a parent spending those dollars on a private school. Next slide, Betty. What are the eligible things that the parent might spend the money on? Well, the Arizona Department of Education has listed these helpfully for us. And allowable, well, I think that's probably too small for most of you to read, but let me tell you that what's allowable would be things like books and tuition. Okay, that sounds reasonable. Also, gym memberships, backpacks, laptops. These are all allowable expenses that you can spend your educational savings account on. Disallowable, and this list is a bit of an eye-opener to me that the state felt it was necessary to put this list together. You're not allowed to spend your education savings account on video games, or a baby grand piano, or barbecue grills, or weapons and ammunition. Next slide. Next slide, Betty. So I talked briefly there about educational savings account. This one's called a tax credit educational savings account. Slightly different. Tax credit ESAs allow taxpayers to receive full or partial tax credits when they donate to specific nonprofit organizations. These nonprofit organizations then pay the money out to parents who wish to spend the money on a private school. Families may use those funds to pay for various education-related expenses, such as private school tuition, fees, online learning programs, private tutoring, community college costs, higher education expenses, and other approved expenses. Sometimes they can even roll over unused funds from year to year. Now, notice here, slightly different. This is less direct, but very similar to an educational savings account. This time, the government does not directly fund the educational savings account. The money instead is funneled through a tax credit system. You have to watch the money here to see how it moves. Here's how it works. A taxpayer, one of us, might want to donate to one of these nonprofit organizations that have been specifically set up to manage these tax credit educational savings accounts. Families who set up an educational savings account then withdraw the money, wishing to send their children to private schools. The taxpayer's donation then, the person who started all this, the taxpayer's donation then is returned to them in the form of a tax credit. That can sometimes spread over, but they will get the money back in a tax credit. Now notice that the private school tuition at the end of this line has been paid in whole or in part by government funds that were part of that tax credit for the donation that was given by the taxpayer. Bottom line, end result, is that public taxpayer money is being paid out to cover private school costs. Next slide, Betty. School vouchers. Vouchers give parents the freedom to choose a private school for their children using all or part of the public funding set aside for their children's education. Under such a program, funds typically expended by the state or a school district would be allocated to a participating family in the form of a voucher to pay partial or full tuition for their child's private school, and that includes both religious and non-religious options. This option is probably the easiest one to understand. Proponents say that this money would have been spent on a child going to a public school anyhow. In other words, this is the money that was set aside for a child to go to a public school, and that money is now following the child to a private school. That argument has some truth in it if the student was in a public school and the money follows that student to a private school. That's not necessarily the case with some of these other programs that we're talking about this evening. And in all of these cases, the private schools we're talking about are mostly religious schools. Vouchers are paid from dedicated school funding. They don't come out of the general funds as some of these other programs do. Next slide, Betty. Last one we're going to mention tonight are these things called tax credit scholarships, and this is kind of a hybrid program. Tax credit scholarships allow taxpayers to receive full or partial tax credits when they donate to nonprofits that provide private school scholarships. Eligible taxpayers can include both individuals and businesses. That varies from state to state. In some states, scholarship giving nonprofits also provide innovation grants to public schools and/or transportation as assistance to students who choose alternative public schools. If you're following the money here, you'll realize that as with a tax credit educational savings account, these programs lessen the amount of tax revenue that's collected in the general fund for programs other than for education. There are differences between this one, the tax credit scholarship program, and the tax credit educational savings account. There are differences, but the overall impact is the same. Tax monies that would have been paid into general revenues are funneled via a tax credit to the nonprofit, to the parent who wishes to withdraw from that, to the private school system. Okay, Betty, next one. And I think this now goes to Betty.
Yeah. This slide and those following show how state education budgets are being impacted by private choice. The pie chart on the left shows that funds for private choice are a very small part of the total funds for state and local programs, less than 1% of total expenditures. However, the pie chart on the right shows that out of what all the states spend for education, $421 billion, the percentage of funds going to private choice options is about 2%. The proportion is increasing largely because of programs in a handful of states. We will be looking at Arizona as an example of what happens. Note that federal funds are excluded here. Federal funds typically add another 8 to 10% on top of state and local dollars. The pie chart on the left again shows the total of all state education funds, again $421 billion. If we consider how states spend these dollars, on the right, we see that most of the funds spent for private choice have no income restrictions. Therefore, any parent, any child in the state can apply for an ESA or a tax credit scholarship regardless of their income. Only 24% of these programs have a restriction by the income level of the parents. This map shows the financial impact private school options are having on different states. Note that Florida, Wisconsin, and Arizona spend the largest percentage of their education budgets for private choice, with Florida at 22%. In addition, there are 3 other states, Ohio, Indiana, and Oklahoma, which spend at least 5% of their state education dollars in private school choice. We believe that the 3 with the largest percentages may have that large percentage because they have been doing choice longer than the other states. It's possible by looking at these 3 states that they show us what is likely to happen in the future, unless something changes from the current administration's plans. In 2025, 33 states, plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, have at least some version of choice. But all of them involve moving public funds to private schools. So you could go to Education Choice, to the resource we cited and is available in our resource list, and see what kind of programs occur in each of these states. Looking at Arizona, we see there are 4 green dots, meaning there are 4 different programs with tax credit scholarships and 1 program for the education savings amount. Maine is an outlier here. It only has 1 very specific program for students who live far from a public school. This chart shows how much money each state is investing in private education options. Just a reminder, ESAs are a government-authorized savings account. Parents can use the funds to pay for a variety of educational expenses. In some states, including Arizona, ESAs can be saved to use for college. For example, in 2025, Arizona has invested over $1 billion in private schools, over $800 million in ESAs, and $258 million in tax credits. In Florida has invested, with the greatest amount, Florida has invested almost $4 billion in private schools, $2.7 billion from ESA programs, and over $1 billion from tax credit programs. Again, the pie graph on the left shows the total state education funds in fiscal year 25. Of the funds spent for private school, the majority of funds 45% come from education savings accounts. The remaining 55% are divided between vouchers and tax credits. As indicated, the ESAs have grown from 39% of private school choice funding to 45% in the last year.
My turn again. So what do the proponents and opponents say about school choice? Well, proponents say students are being saved from failing public schools, failing being defined as scoring poorly on state or national standardized tests. Opponents say, well, according to independent researchers, students in private schools score no better than students in public schools. The word independent is very important there because sometimes private schools will have themselves tested by somebody who perhaps is not an independent researcher. So when independent researchers do the comparison, students in private schools score no better than students in public schools. I just read recently yet another report saying exactly that, this time in The Economist, which is a sort of center-right magazine. Opponents also say that private schools are often not required to test their students, in which case making comparisons would be invalid. Opponents also say that funds are available to all parents even if the student doesn't attend a failing school. So in other words, there's no rescue going on here. If the student was not in a failing school, the student didn't need to be rescued. And some of these students are not even in public schools. They are already in private schools, and they're still receiving funds, now subsidizing their parents for sending them to private schools. Proponents also say parents have more say in their children's education. And that's probably true, because private schools can handpick their students, and they're most often religious schools. So there's a siloization going on here of who is in any particular school. Also, the cost of private schools may actually be more than the ESA or voucher or scholarship provides, in which case some families will be left out because they can't afford the extra that would be needed to meet the school's tuition level. That means that we are funneling money away from parents who might be in need of help to get their children to private schools towards parents who are already wealthy. Next, please. This graph indicates where testing is done and where it's not done. So for example, the X on Arizona indicates that if Arizona schools are accepting tax credit scholarship monies to pay for tuition, they don't have to do any testing. So making comparisons with public schools is just not valid. Next slide. Proponents say more parents will be able to afford private schools. Opponents say, in response to that, well, there's often no income limit for families receiving funding from choice programs. In other words, this money isn't being funneled towards or targeted to families who are in need of subsidies. Private schools, in addition, may raise the tuition if parents are being subsidized by the state, making private schools even more exclusive. And students are often not required to even attend a public school before they get one of these subsidies, whether it's an ESA or a tax credit scholarship or a tax credit education savings account. They may not be in a public school when they get this. They may already be in a private school. The funds are really not being targeted for the most part to socioeconomically challenged families. Proponents say that adding choice, one more on that last one, Betty. Proponents say that adding choice won't cost the public and may save taxpayer money since students won't be in public schools. And that argument holds a bit of water if you're talking about a voucher that goes with a student from the public school to the private school. But later you're going to see some graphics that indicate in more detail who actually is taking advantage of these choice programs. Next slide, Betty. So proponents finally say that if student achievement level is not improved, what matters is that parents have a choice. And opponents say some parents just do not have that choice. The subsidy for public funding may not cover all the tuition at the private school, leaving the option still out of reach. And there may not even be a private school close to the student's home, so no way for the parent to conveniently get the child to this private school. Next slide, please. And that's Joanne. Joanne, you know more about this kind of education, special education, than the rest of us, so over to you.
Thank you. Originally, voucher programs are only for students with disabilities, and these were for kids who were actually in the public school. So in Florida and in Texas, that I'll talk about in a minute, students first had to attend the public school system, be identified as students with disabilities under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Then if the family chose to use the voucher option to attend a private school, funding was determined based on disability. So you got more funding if your child had had some more severe disabilities or multiple disabilities or whatever. So Texas, like what Florida did, and today, I can't believe this is so timely, a bill went to the Texas governor today that will provide up to $30,000 for special education in private schools per child. However, again, to receive the voucher, the public schools are required to complete a comprehensive special education evaluation for all students interested in private school vouchers. Now, this includes students that have, and their parents had no interest in ever attending a public school. So now they're saying you have to be in the public school or ask the public school to get an evaluation. And the federal law does require any family to request an evaluation, whether or not you're homeschooled or in a private school. So the public schools are being asked to complete these evaluations. There's no extra money going to them for that. And now, if then the parent, once they get the evaluation, can then, the state will determine the level of severity, and the parents will get a voucher based on the child's level of severity to take to a private or a private religious school. Now, as I said, the evaluation provision was added because normally students in Texas now can get $10,000 to go to a private school. And they wanted a version that would award more money to students in special education in line with the amount they would receive if they were enrolled in the public school. And this approach mirrors Florida's plan. Okay. The IDEA, whoops, my thing just came up here. Okay. The IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, bans discrimination against people with disabilities. Now, private schools, you can't ban any child that shows up at your door, you take. Okay, you can go to the next one, Betty. But private schools, okay, they do have to comply with Title III of the Americans with Disability Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, because they're indirect recipients of federal funds, and it's too complicated to explain that, not right now. But as such, a private school only needs to provide minor adjustments to their existing programs to show that they are accommodating a child with a disability. And they are not required to substantially change their program because there's always they're always afraid of being accused of discrimination. So they don't discriminate if they make minor adjustments. Private school voucher schools can lawfully exclude a child with a disability without constituting legal discrimination. And because discrimination is determined differently in public and private spaces. Again, public schools cannot discriminate. You take every child that walks in the door. Okay, next slide. All right, some of the issues for children with disabilities. Private schools are not required to have resources that the children need. They're not required to provide all the resources that meet the needs of the child. These children will come up with, there'll be an evaluation done by the public school, they take to the private school, and the private school can determine, you know, the public school may have said, this child needs speech or reading or whatever. The private school can make any determination they want. Teachers in private schools are not required to be certified for special education. Some states don't require teachers to be certified. In Michigan, teachers still need to be certified, but nothing for special education. It's impossible to know how many special ed students private schools serve, or the number of seats that they have available in a given region. Private schools do not register or report statistics to any governmental or organizational body. Private schools can simply design their own curriculums and self-identify and say, we're specialized.
Let's give a practical example of how private school choice has impacted one state. And this will help us understand how an expansion of choice is likely to impact other states or us as a nation. In 2022, Arizona became the first state in the nation to offer universal school choice to all students in the state. So there was no previous requirement that a student had to be disabled, a Native American, or already in a public school. Universal eligibility began in fiscal year 23-24. The following slides use information from a nonpartisan think tank in Arizona called the Grand Canyon Institute. 2023 was the first year of universal eligibility in Arizona, meaning any student was eligible for ESAs. In that year, we see that 29,176 students enrolled in the ESA program. Of those students, 6,157, or 21%, had attended a public school before they enrolled in the ESA program, meaning that 79% of the students who enrolled in private school or homeschooled were not in a public school previously. If we look at 2025, we see that 8,015 students, universally eligible students, enrolled in an ESA program. 4,537 had attended a public school before they enrolled, representing 57% of the total number of students who were in ESA, and still 43% of the students who enrolled in the ESA were homeschooled or in a private school before they enrolled. Out of almost 80,000 students receiving ESA dollars, only 321 were attending a failing school. Another 13,000 were classified as disabled students, meaning that almost 60,000 students out of 80,000, approximately 3/4 of all the students who applied for and received an ESA were universally eligible. ESA voucher funds are disproportionately concentrated in wealthy communities. The wealthiest zip codes in Arizona have more than 10 times as many voucher users as voucher users in predominantly low-income zip codes. In fiscal year 2024, of the 66,000 students who were receiving ESAs, 52%, more than half, went to families with incomes over $81,000 and as high as $178,000. Only 5% of the ESA recipients lived in what we might term low or moderate income families. 70% of families using ESAs come from high-income zip codes when we match them with the census data. Regardless of the SES measure that we use, poverty rate, median income, or educational attainment, more advantaged communities are securing a highly disproportionate share of the ESA scholarships in Arizona. There's no reason for us to think it would be different in any other state. If we look at how the ESA money for the private schools are distributed in and spent in the state of Arizona, we see that 42% go to evangelical Christian schools, 36% go to Catholic schools, saying that nearly 80% of all the ESA private school dollars in Arizona went to Christian or Catholic schools. How did parents spend their universal ESAs in fiscal year 2024? A little more than half went for tuition, textbooks, or fees. Another 15% might be purchased curriculum materials such as online materials. 9% went for tutoring. 7% went to pay for online, totally unregulated schools. 5% for computers, and 11% for other things. In Arizona, you can carry over funds that aren't used to the following year. How will ESA expansion to include all students impact school choice? This quote is from 2023, when universal expansion first went into effect. The estimated award for fiscal year 23 of $6,966 covers the entire average cost of private elementary schools in the state, but only a third of the cost of private secondary schools, which is $18,590. Consequently, families will have to pay around $12,000 per student out of their own pocket once they reach high school. The families that experience the greatest expansion of school choice are those who are wealthy enough to pay the difference in tuition at the secondary education level. Well, how come low-income parents don't take advantage of these ESAs? Well, in the interviews that the Grand Canyon Institute did, several families said they simply didn't know about the program. Some mentioned that they didn't have the social contacts or the time, given that they were both working, to investigate whether or not vouchers would be a better option for their kids than regular public school, where it's really simple to enroll and to navigate. Still, they'd come to understand that the ESA program was not designed for them, not in the day-to-day sense. Logistical obstacles would make using vouchers to attend private school practically impossible. It may not cover the total cost of tuition. It would cost a lot of money and time for working parents to get their children to and from schools because buses would not be provided. One parent also said she didn't enroll because she realized that the academics wouldn't necessarily be an improvement over the local public school. And of course, school meals, breakfast, lunch, and often weekend meals are not included in the ESA costs. And a number of parents mentioned that they were expected to participate in auctions and raffles and other fundraisers, which they did not have extra money to do. Arizona rules for private school totally lack any kind of accountability. ESA participants are required to use a portion of their funding for reading, writing, grammar, math, science, and social studies, but there are no standards for math or reading proficiency. There are no tests to necessarily measure outcomes in math or reading. There's no curriculum oversight. State agencies are not required to visit. There's no academic evaluation that you and I could look at to see how a school was rated. Is it an A school? Is it a D school? And why? Based on what criteria? There are no financial controls required, no annual financial reporting of how funds have been spent in areas such as instruction versus administration versus other ways that a private school may be spending their money. There's no teacher salary information, and private schools have much discretion to deny parents' rights compared to district or charter schools. There's no public audit required, and none of the audits that are done by the Department of Education cover private school expenditures. There's no oversight of cash on hand to inform parents whether or not a school has financial viability and will be there from one year to the next. And private schools are not subject to public records requests. So what is the result of this growing choice programs? Tax revenue, public tax revenue, subsidizes unregulated private school education to the detriment of public school funding. Other state agencies now face major budget cuts to make up for the revenue deficits caused by the spending shifts. This graph shows you what percentage the universal vouchers are responsible in the budget shortfalls of the state of Arizona. While the budget shortfall in Arizona cannot be completely blamed on universal vouchers, the net cost of the vouchers rose from $322 million, and you can see about what proportion it is from the deficit, to an estimated $429 million in 2025. It's a much larger percentage of the deficit than any other program that Arizona is doing. For fiscal year 2025, Arizona is facing $1 billion budget shortfall. To be exact, it's facing a $1.4 billion budget shortfall, and much of it is a result of the new voucher spending. Last fiscal year alone, the price of universal vouchers in Arizona skyrocketed from the original official estimate of just under $65 million to $332 million, the Grand Canyon analysis found. Another $429 million in costs is expected this year. The impact of funding on state budgets remains unclear. Because the majority of families who took advantage of the funding were not coming from public schools and therefore not bringing their per pupil funding with them, these subsidies represent a new state level cost. That quote comes from Josh Cohen, who was quoted in the Detroit Free Press only last month. We also can see that 5 of the 8 states have no caps on how much money can be expended for ESAs. There are no caps in 5 states: Arizona, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, and West Virginia. The total expenditures for private schools just in these 8 states is $4.1 billion, representing 7% of the state K-12 education expenses. Failure to rein in these costs means critical areas of state government expenditures for water, for air pollution, highway funds, post-secondary education, healthcare will have to be cut to balance the budget. What's likely to be the impact of proposed federal legislation? A lack of accountability. Teacher certification no longer required. No participation in state or national testing to gauge student progress. No reports of student graduation. No way to be able to tell the success rates of students. We would expect an increase in the number of private schools and rising tuition at those schools. We believe that there will be ballooning costs to state budgets to cover a portion of tuition for students who are already enrolled in private schools. We expect that funding levels are likely to fall short of what is necessary to provide a high-quality education. We expect major cuts in public school budgets, which still have fixed costs for their buildings, maintenance, nurses, library, special needs funding. With the birth rates declining in the United States, this will also result in major cuts in public school budgets. We will expect to see discrimination against underperforming or non-conforming students because they can be admitted or refused or let go from schools for any reason. There are almost no private schools in rural areas, so we expect that rural students will have very few options. There's also no clear list of what is an approved goods and services for purchase by parents or schools. Shortly after President Trump was inaugurated, he put out an executive action called the Expanding Educational Freedom and Opportunity for Families. In this, he said, the Secretary of Education should include education freedom as a priority in discretionary grant programs. Within 90 days of the date of this order, which is actually today, the Secretary of Labor and the Secretary of Education shall review their respective discretionary grant programs, and each will submit a plan to the President that identifies, evaluates, and makes recommendations regarding using relevant discretionary grant programs to expand education freedom, another word for choice, for Americans, families, and teachers. The League of Women Voters has active support for public school, the development of a publicly financed public education system in which there is equitable opportunity for an excellent education available for all children, and an education structure that provides transparency and accountability at all levels and in all venues. Lest we end this on a totally pessimistic note, we hope that you will take some solace from President Obama's ideas that if you are driven by the core idea that together we can improve the lives of this generation and the next and the children to come after that, if you're persistent, if you stay with it and are willing to work through the obstacles and the criticism and continually improve where you fall short, you can make America better and you can have an impact on millions of lives. So now Susan will read us from the chat room. Any questions? And also there is a link in the chat to allow you to register for the May 20th lunchtime talk by Dr. Cohen.
I don't know
Thanks.
how to use the chat. Can I raise my hand after and ask some questions?
Sure.
All right,
Sure,
Susan,
Jane,
go
let-
ahead.
Let me
No,
ask,
no,
let me ask this question that was submitted to the chat. Are Arizona schools funded by property taxes? Betty, you might know best.
They're funded on a combination of local taxes as well as state income taxes.
And Jane, why don't you go ahead?
okay. This is a new world to me. I'm not familiar with the choice thing at all. So I am assuming then that public education will become the repository for disabled children. Is that likely?
I think that would be extremely likely.
Okay.
The other group that will be there are very low income children whose families don't have the options. We are likely to see larger numbers of English language learners,
Yeah,
migrants, families. We're likely to see students who require extra funding and extra programs, which are currently mostly not available in private schools.
okay. I don't understand the significance of having attended public schools before you do choice. I don't understand that. Did I miss something?
Okay.
I can answer that. For some reason, even you can do an evaluation on any child under the IDEA, but both Florida and Texas require the student enroll in the public school, request an evaluation. This is for special ed only. For special ed, they do the evaluation, and then the parent can take voucher money and go to a private school. When it comes to students without a disability, they do not have to enter the public school first.
And then I have the most naive question of all.
Wait a minute. I would like to
Okay.
answer
Yeah.
to Jane as well. To Jane, if you're thinking of the number of times that I mentioned and the kids don't even have to be in a public school in the first place.
Right.
If the kids are already in a private school, then the parents have been able to pay for that in the past. So we're not rescuing kids from a failing public school to put them in a private school. We're subsidizing parents who already have kids in private schools. So this money is not being targeted to help kids in failing schools or socioeconomically challenged families. It's being funneled to wealthier families. And
Okay.
Betty had some good graphs on that.
Yeah,
I get it.
And the way the choice program works is that the dollars follow the child.
Yeah.
So in Michigan, if I choose to go from East Lansing to Okemos, the $7,000 that East Lansing would have received now move to Okemos. And it would be the same thing with private school choice. If my son is going to a public school, when he moves to a private school, those dollars are now going from the public system into the private system.
Okay, I get it. And the most naive question of all, but absolutely serious. Whatever happened to the separation of church and state?
Oh,
No, I'm serious about that.
Well,
When I'm 82, so I was in public schools in the 40s, 50s, 60s. There was none of this, and all of a sudden here we are.
Mhm.
And
Well-
I don't know the historical content.
well, the
Well-
Supreme Court
Yeah,
Very
Court ruled on it, and now I read about it today again. There is a case in front of the Supreme Court right now, and it's about a Catholic school.
yeah,
I think it's Oklahoma. Am I right? Oklahoma wants to become a charter school. Now, in like charter schools are public schools. Okay. So in Michigan, if you go to a charter school, it is considered a public school. They have to follow the same rules. And the case in front of the Supreme Court right now is asking that this Catholic school be allowed to be a charter school, which would then consider it a public school, but yet it's a Catholic school. So that is in front of the Supreme Court right now.
All right, I think we can discuss religious schools ad infinitum. Susan, we have more questions? Any more questions in the chat room?
I'm not sure where Susan is, but I see one here that's from Nancy, saying, is there any movement in Michigan to advance private school choice at this time?
And the answer to that is it has been proposed previously and was voted down last year by a democratically controlled House and Senate. And so far, it has not been discussed in the legislature. I think we can safely say that the current governor would not sign such legislation.
And I think that's what happened last time. Did you say that, Betty, that she vetoed it last time because we have in our constitution that public money can't go to private schools, but that's exactly what folks proposing this last time around in Michigan were trying to do. They were trying to get together a petition which would then change that law.
I don't see it happening in the near future. So thank you all for attending. There is a very long list of resources that are available that we have used for this presentation. Anyone who wants a copy of the slides can email me, and that address was, here are the resources, and here I am. And if you don't get the link to the YouTube video that Donna has put up, or if you would like to register for Dr. Cohen's program, and also there will be a YouTube video, I will be glad to send those to you. So we really appreciate you all coming tonight. I hope this was it was a good learning experience for you. It's a very complicated issue, and it's scary for me as a grandmother of what may be coming for my family and for everybody else's family.
Yeah.
So
that's why
thank
we
you.
fight.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.